Thank you, Mr. Bali. So our next speaker is again someone from a company who, in my opinion, has been instrumental in establishing Karnataka as a manufacturing hub. And the company which I'm talking about is Toyota Kirloskar Motors Limited. And it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Shekhar Vishwanathan, who has been helming Toyota. He has been a whole-time director and has contributed immensely to the growth of the automotive industry in this state, and making sure that especially the clusters around Bidadi and that area gains prominence as far as manufacturing is concerned. So Mr. Shekhar Vishwanathan is a chartered accountant who started off in the financial industry but moved to manufacturing, and he had a 22-year stint in TKML, which is very significant, and retired as a vice chairman and a whole-time director. So after retirement, he also serves on the board of many reputed companies, and he has been a past president of BCCI, served BCCI as well, and also helped BCIC, and also helped a lot of other industry organizations like CIA Karnataka, Tax Group of SIAM, FICCI Karnataka, etc. So please welcome Mr. Shekhar Vishwanathan to talk about transformational leadership and take Toyota as a case study and talk us through how Toyota achieved this kind of leadership.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that kind introduction. But I would much rather be president of BCIC than BCCI. So my priorities are very clear. I haven't missed anything. Let me now get into the topic proper, which has been given to me, which is less about India and more about Toyota and the globe. And I call Toyota a continuing success story in transformational leadership, simply because I have studied certain, to change the,
yes,
okay, sure. I call it a continuing success story only because it has sustained itself over a long period of time, close to now about 84 years since it started out as a company in 1937. Anyway, I'd like to begin my story with Toyota Motor Corporation as we know it today. It was earlier in the manufacture of looms, hand looms, and then it was involved in the textile trade. And one might be tempted to ask, what is it that motivated them to go from textiles to motor cars? Because I couldn't find any kind of relationship between the two industries. And as I delved into the history books of Toyota, I found that it was the entrepreneurial spirit of the Japanese. At that point in time, we must understand, if you go back in history, you will realize that they had suffered greatly at the end of the Second World War, and their economy was broken. They had nothing else to look forward to, and it was this entrepreneurial spirit which one Mr. Kiichiro Toyoda kind of pushed through the Toyota organization. And he said, I've been to the US, and what we have in Japan is all American-made cars. I think we need to make our own cars. And that's how they got into the motor car industry. Of course, at that time, the priority was building trucks because the economy was broken, and subsequently they moved into motor car manufacturing. Then there came a phase when they were completely focused on rebuilding the car industry nationally in Japan. Japan has 4 islands, and I think that itself was a big enough market for them to take them through the 50s. But it was in the 50s that the first signs of internationalization of Toyota began. They did not immediately rush to overseas shores, but they first built their domestic industry. Their approach was build step by step and then get to where they are today. And that's been an abiding philosophy of theirs. Focus on quality, focus on manpower development, etc. But internationalization also brings with it its own challenges. When I talk about internationalization of Toyota, what it means is that they started going to different geographies and established production plants there. And when they did this, they found that the quality levels of, let's say, a plant that was established somewhere in Europe and somewhere in the USA differed greatly from the quality levels that the Japanese plants were spewing out. And that was the beginning, really, of their thinking of the philosophy of made not in Japan, because any product that was made in Japan always commanded a premium simply because of the quality. But then that's when they started moving, to overseas shores, and they found that they could not keep up the quality levels in some of products made in Europe or in the US or in Thailand or in Brazil, because these are the countries they went to. They changed their slogan from made in Japan to made by Toyota. That for them was the major shift. Now, how did they achieve this? They achieved this through a myriad of measures. First, to strengthen the production system itself, the famous Toyota production system, on which I will not spend too much time, and which many of you are already familiar with. Yeah, I think we'll stay with this and then, yeah, sure. Thank you. Then they had various other parameters. For example, they had this parts per million as a rejection metric. Suppliers would supply parts and you would have a ppm level. And in Japan, they had brought down these ppm levels to less than 50 parts per million somewhere in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Whereas when we began operations here in India, I remember in the first year of operations, the rejection rates were at 900 ppm. Okay, 900 ppm compared to 50 ppm from Japan. But it is to the eternal credit of the Indian supply chain, who were in a sense coached mutually. It's not like Toyota went and put people on their shop floors and trained them. They instituted a mechanism called the Toyota Supplier Club, and then they got people to mutually criticize each other, suggest improvements to each other, and beginning with very, very basic stuff, and then they got to a stage where the Indian supply chain was able to drop their ppm levels to less than 10. Today, I think it's a matter of pride for all of us that the Indian supplier partner community has been able to deliver products, parts that are less than 10 ppm, and several of them do it at 0 ppm. So this is statistics which is available. I mean, this is not something that I'm saying to make Toyota look good, or I think India should feel good, should look good, and is on the right track. Now, some of these measures were transformational change. You had to do many things, and for this leadership, you had to drive these changes. These changes don't happen just like that. I still remember when I went and started establishing this what they call the Toyota Kirloskar Supplier Association, where we would visit plants of suppliers and they would come here. Initially there was a lot of resistance, but I got the unflagging support from headquarters, and they said, we will not only do this, we will also take you out to other plants and see for yourself as to what is happening there. So for example, we went to Thailand, we went to Australia, I traveled to Japan, of course, and the Europe and in the USA. And the one thing that struck me was, whenever I went to any of these plants, except for the accent, the storyline was the same. And that was really the beginning of, or the fructification of made by Toyota. So I think this is a wonderful internationalization of Toyota. They realize that you can't expect everything to be like in Japan, where societal pressures are there for you to conform. In India, it's not there. In several other countries, it's not there. In fact, in some cases, Toyota had to take a very hard decision and say, if we can't change, we close. And this they did in Australia. After having been in operations there for a long time, they closed it down. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So what does the current transformation really mean? And I'm not going to go into many details because there are many, many stories of transformation that I can talk to you on Toyota about. But I will restrict myself today to the current transformation, which is the transformation in technology. Now, this is a one in a 100 years change that is happening. The advent of electric vehicles, the advent of hybrid vehicles, the coming of age of hydrogen, which is now being very actively talked about, and there are alternative fuels which are now coming into play. So all of these is what the current transformation story is. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, the advent of hybrids. Toyota started the hybrid story quite some time ago. I believe they started in the 90s. And the reason they started with hybrids and they didn't want to move to a full electric vehicle is because you don't have charging infrastructure. And while it's very easy, in fact, I'll share this story with you. When GM closed down its plant in California, it was GM and Toyota which was commonly running that plant. It was called NUMI, I think, New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated. GM declared bankruptcy. This plant got closed down. But then the California government came up and said, no, you'll have to restart. And they pleaded with Toyota for this. And Toyota was also anxious to oblige. And they started making hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles along with Tesla, Elon Musk. But that was there was a division of opinion. And that division of opinion was, you can make electric vehicles only, and that was Elon Musk's view. And Toyota's view was, we can make hybrid vehicles because to effect the transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to full electric is going to take you about 50 to 70 years. This is what they said way back in the 90s. And there was that cleavage of opinion. And Toyota had that investment in NUMI, or which subsequently became Tesla. They had that investment for a very long time, and then they sold that investment for a handsome profit. Today, Toyota is at that stage where they've said, all our vehicles will now be only hybrids, where we will depend on batteries which are of small size and not of very big size. And so our dependence on lithium is to that extent reduced. Next slide. Therefore, there is today a global push on the part of Toyota towards hybrids and hydrogen. Hydrogen they've already introduced through their car called the Mirai, but it's very expensive and they're not able to bring the costs down. This is the reality. Now, does it mean have they given up on the hydrogen dream? The answer is absolutely not. Have they given up on the electric vehicle dream? Absolutely not, because they're working on solid state batteries. This is the time when they are thinking through technologies that will fit and remain and be sustainable for long periods of time. Now, as a company, we can't bet on one technology and say, that this is the technology that's going to succeed. You put your shareholders at risk, you put jobs at risk. So you've got to be prepared for a gamut of technologies that will find favor in different markets around the world. Just for your information, Toyota sells about 10 million vehicles annually every year. I think it's the same as Volkswagen. I think the others have dropped off the race, and I think Toyota's responsibility now is to make sure that you meet all the sustainable goals set by the world bodies towards reducing pollution, towards meeting some of the other metrics in terms of decarbonization. So I think this is the period of change, and how Toyota is going to tackle this. Now remember, you can't suddenly say I'm going to shut down, plant after plant across the world and then depend only on electric vehicles. In fact, I'm surprised that governments across the world are saying we'll only swear by electric, or we'll only swear by so and so technology. Governments have no right to bet on one technology. But individual companies can. For example, a Tesla, Mr. Elon Musk is very clear. I believe in electric. If you believe my story, you invest with me, and that's it, which is fine, because then knowingly the investor says, I'm going to go with this technology and I'm going to invest in electric vehicles. Next slide. So, as I was mentioning to you, Toyota does need to change its product and tech lineup, and this calls for strong corporate and industry leadership, and there is a need to manage a once-in-a-century change. This is going to happen. Toyota is well on the way towards managing this once-in-a-century change, but let's not forget one thing. The reason why Toyota has not been able to bring electric vehicles here, there are good reasons for it. The dependence on lithium is one, dependence on China is another. I will stop with this. I think you can just go to the final slide. This change in approach can only be gradual, it can't be sudden. And this is the message that I would like to convey to you, to all of you. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take it. And
I have a question, I'll take the mic.
Yeah, sure.
Hello. Yeah, you actually anticipated one of the questions and answered them. So the question was why Toyota is not bringing EV to India. I think you answered, but I have another question. The TPS was the principle which actually drove lean through the supply chains. Remove inventories, make it efficient, reduce cost, remove waste. But COVID kind of derailed this whole concept and created phenomenal disruptions in production because companies didn't have inventories at the right place. How did Toyota meet this challenge? And did you have to change the way you actually structured your supply chains? And did you have to break any of the Toyota principles on which the whole supply chain was established?
Okay, I may not know the full answer to this particular question, but I will hazard a very educated guess based on inputs that I have received. I don't think Toyota was affected at all, but there were shortages that did result, because at the end of the day, you have to take care of your workforce, and the safety of the workforce is more important than producing cars. Yes, there were shortages. We did come up short. We couldn't meet the market needs, but I think there was a very good reason, and customers did understand. Demand had also fallen, but when the COVID got lifted, that demand kept coming back again.
Thank you, sir. So may I invite the office bearers and Mr. Vishwanath, sir, please come on stage to hand over a memento to Mr. Shekhar Vishwanathan.
Yes, no, that's good enough.
So I did make a Freudian slip by referring to BCIC or BCCI. The only intention I did that was, I, in my dreams, want BCIC to scale heights which are much bigger than BCCI. Okay. So I thought I should set the record straight. So before I introduce the next speaker, I wanted to share an interesting experience I had. This was about 20 years back, and that was my first trip to Japan, a business trip. And the Japanese host there invited me for dinner. And in the dinner he asked me, have you seen Dancing Maharaja movies? I said, sorry, there is no dancing Maharaja in this thing. I thought he was referring to some movie where some colonial whatever this thing. He said, no, no, it is very popular in India. He's the biggest star in India, especially the South. I said, hey, listen, I've not come across this term. And then he said, have you seen the movie Muthu? That is when I realized that the dancing Maharaja, what he is referring to is Muthu, our own Rajni sir. And the person who is, I would say, primarily responsible for making Muthu and the Rajni movies and the Indian movies famous in Southeast Asia, especially Japan, Korea, much before you have all the K-pops and all becoming popular across the world, is here with us today. So my pleasure to introduce Mr. Kandaswamy Bharathan. He is the joint managing director, Kavitalaya Productions, the company which was founded by Dr. K. Balachandar, who is the Dada Saheb Phalke awardee. And many of you are aware that Dr. Balachandar introduced Rajni, Kamal and many other stars into the movie world. And Mr. Bharathan is the joint managing director, and he is the one who's actually set out on a mission, the mission of professionalizing the entertainment industry and the creative industry, right? Because those of you who are familiar with the industry know how disorganized it is. Movie schedules were never done on time. There was no kind of a organized management, and he has been doing this. So how does he do it? He actually has gone about creating a course on how to actually for the creative industry, right? And this course is taught in IIMs, and he happens to be from my alma mater, IIM Ahmedabad, and I know it is a course there. Unfortunately, we didn't have the course when I studied there, which was way back in '93. And if I did have the opportunity, I would have gladly taken it with both my hands. And more than 6,000 plus MBA students across institutions like IMA, ISB have been kind of gone through this course. And today the entertainment industry is growing in India. It forms a very significant part. There is billions of dollars being poured into it. And efforts of Mr. Bharathan is actually very instrumental in creating professionals who can manage this industry, make sure it grows and thrives. So, welcome sir, and you are going to talk about the lessons in excellence from creative industries, a leadership perspective. Thank you.
Wonderful introduction, generous introduction. And good morning to all of you and all the distinguished speakers and officials of BCIC. It's always a delight to come to Bangalore, okay, more so escaping from the heat of Chennai and the last few days, okay. Without further ado, I just want to talk, because one of the resourcefulness of leadership, I believe, is also resource of time, managing time. And I can see the tension of the people here about, so I hope you would not show the, I would try my best to finish it.
There is a timer there, sir, for your
Yes. Oh, it is there. Yes, yes, certainly.
Yeah, the 16 minutes.
Thank you, thank you. That's very helpful. So basically, I want to talk about this without further ado at two dimensions. One is what is the stage of the Indian film industry, and more so the entertainment industry. I remember when I started this, and I had before coming into film industry, I was working in the corporate world for about 12, 13 years. So I could say that I had the privilege to have a mix of corporate experience, and therefore I tried to develop a lot of systems and processes for the entertainment industry. And I must share this very, very small story. In the year 1997-98, and the IT sector was slowly, raising its head with Y2K and all those issues, I said it would be a great idea to design and develop a movie software industry. There was no such software, nothing for creative industry. In fact, in the last 20 years, the creative industry was growing faster than the national GDP. Okay, even now, okay, the industry grows at about 12 to 13%, whereas the GDP growth has been around 6 to 8% the last so many years. So I said it would be a great idea to do this. And I spent about a year I in fact outsourced to an IT company. I designed the whole thing and I branded it. We have some brand friends here. I called it Hero 98. And we launched it in 98. I just wanted to have a launch. So I had about 30 film producers and about 20 directors. And my whole goal was to plug the black money in the film industry at that time. And there was a lot of unaccounted money. And the first question was asked to me, sir, this looks excellent, but where can we show the black money in this software? And the moment I heard that, that was a big disaster. So that was the first failure, if you could call it. But if you just follow the Edison message, that it was not failure, it was a learning. As Edison said, you learn 1,000 steps or 1,000 ways that something doesn't work, and so on. So I want to discuss about leadership, but the same industry, in the last 10 years, we have won 5 Oscars. Okay, there were so many people were complaining that we have not got the global recognition. Okay, in the last 10, 15 years, this was a big grouse in the film industry. But I was always saying, we have not come to world-class standards. Okay, I'm preceded by some great speakers and experts on technology and manufacturing. We are always talking about how to become world-class. Our storytelling is still world-class. The kind of stories that we create, the kind of stories that we try to deliver are world-class, because we are the only country to make films in 24 languages. No other country in the world makes in more than 1 language, or maximum 2 languages. We are the only country in the world which is able to make a film for even $1 million to up to $100 million, or a little less than that. So we have this kind of leadership. There is a great potential that this industry can become in the next 10 years. In fact, I see the leadership of the entertainment industry and put I think we should not get caught up with Bollywoods and Collywoods and Mollywoods. I think it's an Indian entertainment industry to do this. I would like to also discuss about leadership at the individual level. And who is the individual? In the movie, in the corporate world, we say the CEO. Now, who's the CEO of a movie? It is the director. The movie director is the CEO. But we have a very interesting and a fascinating situation in this industry. You may have a 40-year-old director who's got, say, about 10 films in his experience or her experience. I wish there were more women directors. We still don't have enough women directors, but we should get to that. So that's why I said his. But what happens is these directors have to deal with Mr. A.R. Rahman as the music composer in the same project. Somebody who has got 2 Oscars already. Okay, at the age of 43, he got 2 Oscars. You may have a qualified person who has come back from Vancouver Film School or New York Film Academy, who is the cinematographer. So you have to be the CEO of this project, but you have to deal with people who are much more qualified, much more experienced, even more successful than you. So we have a saying, in fact, this was my late chairman, Mr. K. Balachandar, used the word. He himself was Dada Saheb Phalke Waddy, the celebrated director. And he used the expression, first among equals. So every film director is a first among many equals. And that's the kind of leadership. And because they are first among equals, they are able to inspire leadership with the whole team. I have just about 7 slides, and I'll just quickly run through. Can we have next slide? Yeah. So in this one slide, I would like to capture the various traits or characteristics of leaders. And this is not just for film directors. These are for any type of leadership, right? You have to have daring. I think one of the biggest strengths of leaders is to have courage. You have to take that step, that the step that nobody wants to go forward. Okay, how much are we going to lose, right? What are our stakeholders going to come? So if you have that commitment, if you have the passion, you have to have courage. It's a mindset. It's not just the skill set or not just the tool set. There is a mindset for leadership. Expertise, perfectionist. Okay, I'll also say it's not very good all the time to be 100% perfectionist. In the film industry, if the director is too much of a perfectionist, we will never finish the movie. Okay, we will have 15 takes. Okay, we do 14, 15 takes to get perfection and to have enough footage to do the editing and get the best result. But at some point, the incremental time and cost of going from 95% to 99% of the visual is not worth it. So that is where the director has to have the leadership to judge that I'm happy with 90% or 95% of this shot, of this frame. Blockbuster is the word that we use, visionary, inspiring, path-breaking, innovation, and so on. Next slide. So this is actually a big subsection of my course in IMs. But here in this, I'm just going to talk about people management. Because I think one of the greatest aspects of directors, film directors, is their ability to manage teams and manage people. I always say when we speak about teams, it's the good director or a great leader is making an ordinary team into an extraordinary team. How can we make an ordinary take with, let's say, B-list actors, not top-class actors? Most of the time, you may not be able to afford the A-list actors. You may have to use B-list actors. But you have to upgrade the B-list actor to an A-list level of performance in this particular story, in this film. So how do we do that? That happens through people management. Next slide. I'll just show 4 slides. Next slide. The first thing anybody can recall from the names here on which film we might be speaking about. Slumdog Millionaire. Great. Excellent. So the first thing is about diversity. One of the biggest things about our industry is we have educational diversity. Until about 15, 20 years back, only in the last 2 decades, most of the actors have at least a graduate. We used to have a lot of actors who went on to win Filmfare Awards and national awards, but they were dropouts from school, high school dropouts. Just like Bill Gates was a dropout from Harvard. That's in a way. But these same people, the close example is Mr. Kamal Hassan. He is himself a high school dropout, but he is such a great example of performance and talent. So we have to manage educational diversity. We have to manage social diversity. All these people come from social different backgrounds. And we have to raise the lowest common denominator to a certain average level of denominator. And that requires a lot of leadership. And all of this you have to do within the span of 12 to 18 months when you finish the film. So we say from script to screen, you cannot take more than 24 months. If I just share an example, the other day I was talking with Mr. Maniratnam. So PS1 and 2, Ponniyin Selvan, second one is also greatly successful. Both the films required a high level of complexity management. I teach about complexity management in 2-3 sessions with respect to the film industry. You have to manage this diversity and bring them to speed within the first week of starting the film. And PS1 and 2 was done totally within 150 days of shooting. Okay, if I can share, the cost of production was something about 240 crores. Now in the corporate manufacturing parlance, if you had to compare, that's MSME. I suppose, right? If I'm not mistaken. But the MSME will take at least 3-4 years to get into full production. But this project has to be finished within 24 months and delivered to the theaters. Next. Bonding. One of the biggest things that these directors, they create a special bond which comes from a collaborative and creative work environment. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this Hollywood film called Bucket List. It's an old film. There's two great actors, Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson. And these two people came together for the first film, but they became friends for life. Even the story in the movie itself is about two friends who are both, confined to a hospital. And both of them were told they had just 1 year to survive. And in this 1 year, they decided to have a bucket list of what they want to see across the world. And the twist in the story was that one person passed away and the other person survived. And what was the experience of the other person looking back on this? So the strong bonding. Now in the film industry, people could have just come together for one film initially. They may not come together for the next 10 years until the next opportunity comes together, but they become bonded for life. It is also a question of survival. We say in our industry, we say you're as good as your last film. You're just as good as your last film, unless you're a Shah Rukh Khan or Mr. Rajinikanth, where you have already established your track record, your brand. So you can give a couple of flops, but more than 2 flops, people will not tolerate, okay? So this is about bonding. Next slide. Motivation. So you could have, I've seen some very senior speakers, senior actors, like some of the superstars in the South in Tamil. So they have 200 movies experience. So they can just see their scene. They can just listen to the director and just deliver within the first 2 takes. Mr. Amitabh Bachchan is good enough to give every time in 1 take. His talent is so high. But then he would be co-acting with a 23-year-old nervous new face, like a son maybe. And how are these 2 people going to act together? Is AB going to be impatient? Is going to become worried about time, about his time? No. So he will take that young boy and actually do that scene for him. And see, you can try this like this. Okay, this is motivation. And learning from co-actors, learning from people in the spot. Okay, next slide. Feedback is a big thing in the corporate world, right? But how many of us say, at least when I was a young executive in Ashok Leyland, I spent quite a years in Leyland. It was not possible. I would ask for experience quickly, feedback quickly. But they will say you'll get your 1-year performance appraisal and get it after 1 year. I would have been so happy if the feedback was given the next day so that we can improve. But in the movie world, the director has just got one word, cut. The moment the director says cut, the feedback is already given. It has 2 types of feedback. Okay, even an Amitabh Bachchan has to stop the shot and they will come and see the monitor and see that. Sometimes the extra takes can be done for perfection, little bit better perfection. But this is very important. So immediate and effective feedback is one of the lessons of a good leader, good lessons that leadership has to do. And in the film industry, we are trained in this. Next. I'm going to come to the last 2 slides. Mind the gold, not the dirt. This is a very important thing. The film industry, even the young director, after the one film, the first film, they learned this thing, that in every person, we have positives and negatives. Every person is a mix of strengths and limitations. Some people call it weaknesses. I use the word limitations. But the leader has to mine the gold in every person, has to mine the gold in every crisis. has to mine the gold in every opportunity, but not the dirt. Now, you give the example, and I quote this from a very spiritual person, said, if you just dig 100 feet, you will only get dirt and mud and slush. You have to get gold if you go 1,000 feet. So you have to have that patience, you have to dig deep, and you have to mine the gold. Next. Do we have time for a 2-minute video? I just want to finish this. A 2-minute, it's a short video. Can we go to the next one? I have 2 videos, but I'll show the next one because that's shorter. This is the one. Yes, just short this. This is from the film Apollo 13. And all of you know that Apollo 13 was a disaster as a mission, but the astronauts were saved. That's the film about this. So there is a crisis management situation where the mission commander at Houston was behaving and dealing with his team. So it's just about 1 minute and 40 seconds. You can just click on this, does it play? If it doesn't work, we can just, people can go to YouTube. I just want to show it. It's not working. I'm sorry about it. But please go and look at this. The title of this video is called Failure is Not an Option. It's that famous words of the mission commander. He said, we have already failed on the mission of going to the moon, but I don't want even one American to die in space. We have to bring them back. So that's the video. It's just a 2-minute video, but the way the leader dealt with that team and how they were so resourceful. So it's basically a lesson for adaptability, flexibility, and resourcefulness. It's important for leadership. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
So just for the benefit of audience, what is the share of Indian movie industry in the global industry? I mean, for example, in manufacturing and all, we are 3 to 4%. How does the Indian movie industry stand, and what needs to be done to improve
go forward?
This? Yeah.
So in terms of quantity, we are almost 30% of value. I mean, 30% of output, volume, number of films. So that's a good start. We have presence because we have 1,000 films a year, and that excludes short films, documentaries. Today, the documentary world, one of the Oscars came for a documentary, Elephant Whisperers. So that's another big opportunity for documentary filmmakers. These were unsung heroes all these years. Comes to value, you know the dollar, sir. The dollar is 85 or 80 plus. So in terms of value, it is about $3 billion as compared to Hollywood, which is about $15 billion. And just the multiplex revenues. I'm not speaking about all other revenues, like music rights, digital rights. We have a long end of the tail. So if you have good IP, for example, I'm very proud to have the film Roja, which is a film that we produced. So we have such a long tail. Even after 25 years, we still get revenues. So that's the nature of this industry. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I invite the office bearers to come on stage, and Mr. Vishwas from Vishwas Group of Companies to please come on the stage, hand over a memento to Mr. Bharathan.
So our next speaker is Dr. Chetan Singhai, Academic Lead and Associate Professor, Chanakya University, Bangalore. So he's a PhD from NIIS in the IISc campus, a very reputed institute, Indian Institute of National Institute of Advanced Studies. He also received the prestigious Erasmus Mundus Scholarship to pursue a Masters in Lifelong Learning, a joint degree of UK, University of London, University of Aarhus in Denmark, and the University of Deusto in Spain. So he worked with Dr. Kasturi Rangan on the new education policy, 2017 to 19. So I invite Dr. Singhai to come on stage and share some perspectives about how India aspires to grow leadership qualities in the budding minds, how education can play a significant role.
So indeed, it's a great pleasure that I'm here amidst all of you. I must thank the office bearers of BCIC, Dr. Ravindran, Dr. Devarajan, and Mr. Vinith for having me here. Interestingly, it is sharp 12. This is also popularly known as the swing shift when we move to the afternoon. So I'll also ensure that I have to break the myth that if a professor gets a mic, they don't usually stop on time. So I'll try my best to see how I can complete within the given time that the timer is here in front of me. Yes, this is a very interesting period of educational transformation because what I saw from morning to now, one common link in most of the talks were in two words. One was skills, another one was education. I think that is something that would be very critical for us to reflect upon while we go on the discussion on the NEP. We are also the third largest higher education system in the world, followed by US and China respectively. But at the same time, we are also very fortunate to have a very efficient demographic dividend, which can be an asset or a liability if not effectively addressed. And that is where education becomes a very crucial and a critical sector to reflect upon. Why it is important that we need to emphasize on education for three reasons. One, this education that we refer to, especially the one which we have experienced in the last few decades, there has been a very classic debate whether education is a means or an end by itself. I think that is where the NEP comes into the picture, where it harnesses upon the fact that education ought to be and not only a means but an instrument for capacity to leading to capability. I think that's what I want to unpack in the next few minutes on how this is coming out in the document. And also in Karnataka, while it is being implemented, what are the experiences of how it is being actually practiced. The second important component of education debate that we are having is, unfortunately, we have not seen education as a continuum. We've always seen education as watertight compartments. And we are all victims of that in a way, because what we did in school education, we did not reflect much in higher education, and what happens in higher education did not come back to school education. NEP very clearly puts this in perspective from day one, that whatever changes have to happen, let's say in primary or secondary, must see the roots in the foundational stage. And that is where the entire document itself is a testimony of continuum. I think that is where we are also reflecting upon what are the changes or recommendations which will enable the two important dimensions that I mentioned. And I'm sure all of you agree that our education system is outdated because we are not ready for 21st century needs with what we have. Just to give one example, a very interesting book by Yuval Harari's 21 Lessons for 21st Century, which in fact also in a way refers to the reforms that NEP recommends. One of them is shift from what to think to how to think. And that second, the latter, how to think, is not something which is what we experience in our education system, because very often we come out of the system and then realize that we are only focusing on what to think and not on how to think. And interestingly, the national curriculum framework, which is aligned to the national education policy, which is in the making, also the draft is in public domain since last month or so, reflects upon this shift, that is from what to think to how to think. And that is where my previous distinguished speaker also referring to creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, how these three ought to have to come into the education system. These are all aspirations which are also there in the policy document, but in practice also there are challenges, but doesn't mean that we are not ready to do that. I think that is where I would like to come in the last part of my discussion. The other important component which the NEP drafting committee reflected was this massive brain drain which is happening, especially at a higher education level, because most of our young minds are not being able to be retained in the country, because for instance Karnataka itself annually, should I say exports, I don't know, but preferences that are there in abroad are close to 7,328 students annually on an average going from Karnataka itself. So as a nation, you can just, sort of multiply it to the states that we have, and at least the states where there is a very prominent education system, and Delhi is another, and Pune is another city which also contributes to this. So how do we retain them? But before that, the committee also reflected on why do they go there? What is the reason and purpose for them to go abroad? Is it only the brand? Is it the experience? Is it something which is about providing them flexibility and choice? What is that is the reason why they are going there? I think that is where the experience starts with the policy perspective, and all the action was happening in Bangalore, in Nagarbhavi, National Assessment Accreditation Council, where the thinking evolved around how to resurface our education system for 21st century needs. What are the major recommendations of the NEP which will affect all of us, not only in academia, industry, as well as a very small component of a rural experience also matters in this. What are the major recommendations? I would put them into two broad levels, macro level and the micro level. So macro, when I say, it is the state, nation, and the system as a whole, and I would limit myself to higher education, because education is also, as I said, is very complex. So for the given time, I will focus on higher education. First is integrating soft and life skills. Very often our communication skills, our skills with regard to even digitalization, financial literacy, etc., was kept out of the curriculum. It was not integrated with the curriculum. And hence many agencies who were working on this, including the Reserve Bank of India, they came forward and said, we have a curriculum on financial literacy. And as you all know, in the sector that you are all part of, how important is having those basic financial literacy, and that was integrated in the curriculum, because NEP recommended there should be no distinguishing factor between curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular. Every aspect should be curricular. Every action, every experience of the learner must be credited for the fact that they are spending time and efforts and their passion to it. And hence this mixing of the co-curricular, extracurricular, and curricular came into the being, with also linking that with soft skills, life skills, including vocational education. Because vocations is something which is also enabling us to have those life skills and soft skills. So our curriculum framework, which is now being made, the school education, to spill the beans for the time that you have not read, or if you are not getting exposed to that, is going to have making mandatory vocational education, soft skills, life skills, along with curricular component from age of the from the age of 8, it is going to be made mandatory. The third important shift that we see is the emphasis on science and technology innovation. Very usefully and very appropriately, we had the National Science Technology Innovation Policy 2022, which was long due, which was in 1988, the last one. So you can see the gap that we had, aligned to the NEP's recommendation, where very interesting points, there are many points, but one of the important point I would like to share is, over time, our higher education system, especially the expansion that we saw in the last decade or so, has been largely in the private sector. The public sectors have continued to sustain themselves, but whereas maybe while I'm talking, there's another private university coming up. That's the pace at which the universities are being established. But there is a long and very huge gap and diversity between these two types of institutions in terms of their contribution, because most of the private universities have been teaching intensive. They have not been research intensive. Whereas public universities ought to be teaching intensive, but there's also a lot of pressure on them to be becoming more research intensive. So this is a very small issue to be acknowledged, but it is a very important and detrimental factor for enabling innovation and science and technology reforms in the country. So the National Research Foundation, which has been envisaged in the NEP, which has been implemented, is focusing on these gaps. And I think that would help us bringing, most importantly, the industry together. Otherwise, this innovation would be only limited to the higher education institution, and then the gap will be much more wider rather than being integrated. The other important component is internationalization at home. NEP's recommendation that we should not be introvert, we should not be isolated from what's happening across the world. In fact, we should be focusing on internationalization at home, in meaning there's a lot of research that nation itself sort of exposes to for many scholars to across the world to come down and do research. One of the statement which came, Dr. Manjul Bhargava, who is a mathematician in Princeton University, is a member of the NEP. One of the interesting fact came was that, in fact, it was an outcome of a discussion where he said, to quote him, there is limited or no India-based research on Indian issues by Indians in Indian setup, right? So, and that was really a very thought-provoking situation, that why is that an Indian scholar, when they go abroad, they're able to do Nobel-winning research, but why is that they're not able to do such research in India? But India is becoming a nation like a Google for research. Any area you study, right from social science to science, you have the empirical sort of data or empirical sort of a situation to be studied. So hence, internationalization at home is to look into what we have and strengthen that, consolidate that, and then export the knowledge that we are supposed to share to the world, rather than opening ourselves to the scholars coming from the West to India, and have a collaboration, but anchor it in your respective institutions. That is another shift. The other important shift at a macro level is what we were talking about, the skill development. See, the New India Literacy Program, which is blind spot for many of us, because it's a 14 days old program, New India Literacy Program. Now, earlier, our adult education was focused on 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that was how we were able to have the National Literacy Mission and so on and so forth. But this new agenda that the nation is setting forth for the New India, aligned to the NEP, is to emphasize on the skills, which are more based on the skills that an individual would have to have their employability component, would have for their entrepreneurship component, etc. So it's a shift from mere 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, to a shift from making an individual to be by himself or herself in terms of having those skill set. So that is a shift which, from literacy mission, we have now moved to New India Literacy Program, which NEP also aspires. At the micro level, what shift we are seeing or going to see in due course, and most institutions are doing it already, and some of you or your relatives or your children might be also exposed to these shifts which are already happening in the last 24 months or more. One shift we have seen in assessment, and that is where we are missing many of our young minds to come into the industry, many of our young minds becoming cynical of the education system. What is that shift was? The shift from summative assessment to formative assessment. Our assessments were largely based on by-hearting, rote learning, memorizing, which makes learning very boring, and also makes learning something which I would not like to do, and it was more directed from the teacher, and that's what top-down, as we say. But now this shift from summative to formative assessment makes the learner at the heart of the assessment process, makes the entire community as part of the assessment process. And this already has started in most institutions, and that shift is already being witnessed, and that will have a lot of effect and impact on the way we are envisaging our broader, vibrant India that we're talking about. The other shift is multidisciplinarity. Unfortunately, and I was a victim of that, because my neighbor decided what I should study on behalf of my parents, because that was a pressure in the, what you call the social pressure or neighborhood pressure. Because there is a perception, right, that if you do science, you have commerce and arts as possible pathways. But if you do commerce, you have still arts if you don't like commerce. But what about people who do arts? They don't have any option. They are just like Abhimanyus in the Chakravyuh. They can't come out. So that was what NEP also acknowledged, that it's time for us to enable flexibility and choice, and to see how we should emphasize on the credits earned rather than the discipline in which the individual is learning. And that is what is the multidisciplinarity component, which is linked to another recommendation, multiple entry and exit. We often say leaders are of two types, one with patience and one without patience. But there are also a lot of young minds who are also impatient. They want to do things after 1 year, but they want to come back to study after maybe few years of experience or entrepreneurial experience. So that is what there's a multiple entry and exit, which has been also referred to in the NEP. And also there's an equity component. Unfortunately, many of the women who come from especially the tier 2, tier 3 cities or towns to the tier 1, they tend to migrate with their spouses without completing their degrees. So here is an opportunity for them to continue where they have stopped, to the institution or the location they are going to. So there's another component of equity, there's a component of flexibility and choice, etc. The third important shift at a macro level is replacing teaching with learning. I think this is something which we have been talking about. We often refer to the Harvards and the Yales of the world, but why we could not do it here? In fact, we also refer to a Gurukula system, which is also emphasizing on learning by doing, but we don't bring it into our education system because that is where we had a long gap since the last policy in 1986 to this policy which has come. So this void is also being filled by emphasizing more on learning rather than on teaching. The fourth shift is emphasis on entrepreneurship. Again, we reify dropouts, but we also tend to not to address the issues or challenges why a dropout was a dropout. In fact, there is a quote in the National Education Policy document by Steve Jobs. There's a reference to that, where he has been quoted saying that much of Macintosh is made up of musicians, artisans, and creative minds. Then they become engineers, right? Then they become the innovators. So this is also a point linked to not just about entrepreneurship culture, but also the aspect of multidisciplinarity. Give choice, give flexibility, give learning as prominence. The other major shift in the macro level is the industry academia linkage, because we in academia always were scared of the industry people because we never had opened our arms to them in terms of please come and collaborate. But why it was so? Because there was a huge gap, because academicians are the big, have a lot of ego. It's very difficult to break their egos. So now there's a systemic change, there's a policy perspective to also include a possibility of having this professor of practice, which has already been practiced in many institutions. So they have been onboarded onto the higher education institutions, people with industry experience. They can come and deliver lectures and take classes, anchor their entire lifetime around the institution, and vice versa. But my larger question too is, our industry is also equally open for academicians to come? That's a big question mark with an exclamatory mark, which I'm right, this is the right occasion to maybe hear from you. But this is one way of opening up to industry academia linkages, but with a plan. It should not be just MOUs, it should be something beyond MOUs. It should be adding something tangible in terms of outcome. And essentially, the policy, I have 5 seconds. Essentially, the policy focuses on a shift from employment to employability, capacity to capability, and a shift from government to institutions. And hence, we all as stakeholders become very critical to have this transformation that the country is envisaging. With this, I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Singhai.
Thank
So may I request Dr. Ravindran and Sunil kindly come on stage to hand over a memento to Mr. Singhai.
There's no question for a professor, so it'll be very...
No questions for professors? No, I have a question. There is a lot of...
I didn't mean to have this break.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is a lot of talk about revisionism. Of course, I know it pertains to history.
Yeah.
But what is your view on this, and how do educators kind of insulate themselves from this kind of pressures, what they see?
So revisionism has been a continuous process since our establishment as a nation per se, but revisionism with certain sense of empiricism, revisionism with certain sense of scientific thought behind it, and especially keeping the pedagogy and the impact that it will have would be very much appreciated, and that is an ongoing process. And that should be also a very important point you brought was these revisions must be locally contextual. We should not be looking at the globe and saying this is what we have to do it here, or this is not something which is not context neutral. It should be very much context centric. Yeah.
So one of the questions comes from Assistant Professor Shruti, and the question is, giving importance, equal importance to curriculum and co-curriculum leads to time constraints to master the field. So how does one balance?
Simple response to that is, as a faculty, we should not attempt to doing that. Just leave it to students and they will balance it.
Okay.
So,
good one. Yes. Thank you.
yes, thank you. Oh. Thank you.
we now move from, we talked about industry, we talked about the public sector, social sector, we now moved to entrepreneurship. And it is my privilege to welcome Mr. T.N. Hari. Hari is a graduate of IIT Madras and IIM Calcutta and a thought leader in this space. So he has authored 8 books and also writes the center page of Mint quite regularly. And so as his credentials, as far as his credentials go, he has been part of 5 high growth startups and helped them shape their growth journeys, including a listing on NASDAQ. So here is someone who has taken a startup and taken all the way up to listing in NASDAQ. So we look forward to hearing from you, sir, on how startups need to think about leadership and what they can do to stand out.
Thank you, BCC, for inviting me to speak. So what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about how the way startups have transformed the innovative and business landscape of India in the last 30 years, and in the process, how they have undergone transformation themselves. So I'll spend some time giving you a little bit of that. So I think in the last 15 years, most of us have experienced iconic, consumer brands. The kind of brands that we probably did not experience in the prior 50-year period. So something very dramatic has happened in the last 15 years in terms of being able to create these brands. And today, probably not a day goes by when most people in this room can't live without surviving or depending upon one of these brands. And these brands are in all the spaces. So you find, for example, in the payment space, you find a PhonePe to a Paytm. In the e-commerce space, you would depend upon a Flipkart to a Big Basket to somebody else, urban company, for instance, Ola, Uber, so many of them. So these iconic brands have all got built in the last 15 years. And I will just tell you about a little bit about what happened that resulted in creation of these brands. So I think, no mega trend really takes shape without, some tipping point happening. And those tipping points are created by certain developments. And a couple of developments resulted in this tipping point creating these iconic companies. The first is the way the internet evolved in India vis-a-vis rest of the world. For instance, in the US, the internet evolved as an advertising or ad-based internet, extremely ad-dominated. In Europe, for instance, it went down the path of data privacy. In China, it went down the path of creating a walled garden, where the government decided what kind of companies would get built on the internet and what kind of companies wouldn't get. And data privacy wasn't important in China at all. The government could view all your data. India went down a completely different path. The path that India took was one of enabling microtransactions. So a few things came together in the form of Aadhaar, broadband in the form of Jio at the right time, and smartphone. A confluence of all these 3 things enabled microtransactions to take place. A UPI got created and all of us transact on the internet regularly. All of us who were so reluctant to even, give our credit card numbers or transact online, excepting by paying cash on delivery, are very comfortable transacting online now. So it's a confluence of many factors that resulted in these things happening. The other factor which created some of this was this kind of success that VCs and hedge funds experienced in China. So after the China success story, everybody quickly understood that the next big story is that of India. So everybody wanted to be here on time. So abundance of VC money was available to, bankroll the dreams of many of these entrepreneurs. So that's the way these companies got created. And I'm not for a moment saying that there were no first generation entrepreneurs who did not create, startups and companies in the previous century. For example, you had lots of great IT services companies that got created. They were all B2B kind of companies, so not as well known as B2C companies. They solved the problems of the Western world, which is high labor cost. They did not dare to solve many of India's wicked problems. Many of India's wicked problems around, infrastructure and commerce on the streets were very difficult problems to solve. So none of them really attempted to solve those problems. But they accomplished a few things. The first was that they created an awesome corporate culture. For the first time in India, you had a collegial, professional and non-hierarchical workplace. So I'm not saying that these kind of workplaces didn't exist prior to these services companies, but these companies took it to a completely different level. The second thing that these companies did was they created a huge talent pool of tech folks. And these tech folks became available to the next generation of internet entrepreneurs. Without this talent being available, the next generation of internet entrepreneurs could never have built that company. And I think these couple of things, and probably there was one other thing that these companies did well, which is they understood the Western markets. Because they operated on the Indo-US, Indo-Europe corridor, they understood Western markets. And because they understood Western markets, they could dare to build products for the Western market. So India began gradually moving from a services-based, IT services to IT products. And all of this happened because of the Indo-US corridor and understanding of Western markets. So these guys, services companies laid the foundation for the next generation of internet entrepreneurs. So I'll just talk a little bit about how the last 15 years have evolved in entrepreneurship. So I would say the first big breakthrough happened sometime in 2008 when two young IIT Delhi graduates started a company called Flipkart. So Sachin and Binny Bansal were probably inspiring to hundreds, if not thousands of entrepreneurs after that. And there were many, many founders who realized that many problems of India that were thought to be unsolvable are actually solvable provided right capital is available. And right capital was available, and therefore all of these entrepreneurs began assaulting the problems that the top 15 million families in India, top 15 million in the economic pyramid, they faced. All their inconveniences, all their needs were getting met. And they were pampered so much that 10-minute delivery also someone tried to attempt. So what happened was that imagined inconveniences of these 15 million families also began getting addressed. And the downside of that was many of India's real problems remained unaddressed. So after the 15 million families' problems were addressed, many unicorns got created. Most unicorns that all of us use currently are all providing services only for these 15 million families. Very few companies yet have been built that can address the problems of the next 60 to 70 million families. The problems that they face are extremely difficult. Their price performance expectations are very different. Their ability to pay is very different. They are far more value conscious, far more price conscious than the top 15 million families. So building products for those who cannot afford to pay needs a completely different mindset. How do you design products which people can pay for? The people in the next category of socio-economic pyramid can pay for. But that also slowly began getting addressed because the 15 million families got saturated. So founders had to go down and find out what problems the remaining people have. As a result of which, you had companies like Razorpay, for instance, getting set up. You had Dehat. You had so many local. The beauty about these companies was that they solved the problems of the people in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And these entrepreneurs themselves came from tier 2, tier 3 cities. And the beauty is that they mirrored the rising India. If you watch IPL today, for instance, you find players are all from tier 3, tier 4 towns of India. They barely speak English, but the amount of confidence that they have is tremendous. So these entrepreneurs who came from tier 3 towns of India were also very confident. They didn't care about the fact that they didn't know English, they didn't know the Western values, but they were very confident that they understood the problems of India and that they began solving for them. So I'm very hopeful that in the next 10 odd years, some of these problems of middle India, which is the next 400 million consumers, will also get systematically addressed. And the interesting thing also is that we also realized sometime in 2016 that building and scaling startups is not the sole preserve of young founders and VC money. It can be, built by large companies. So Jio, the way it was built, was nothing less than building a startup. The way Jio was built and scaled to go on to become the number one telecom player in India is something that entrepreneurs can feel jealous about. So big companies in India also began attempting entrepreneurial journeys. Tatas, who had fallen behind in the entire entrepreneurial journey, they could never make a single bet in the entire consumer internet space, also went out and began acquiring companies like 1mg, companies like Big Basket. All of them realized that, if we can't build it organically, let's acquire, entrepreneurs and the companies they have built and use these platforms for scaling our journeys ourselves. I'll just conclude with, the last thing, which is the funding winter that we are all seeing. The funding winter is a very interesting situation. Actually, the groundwork for the funding winter has been laid for the last 30 decades when easy money was made available to everybody. The American government kept on borrowing money and spending money. And they kept borrowing money by printing treasury bills and bonds. And the Federal Reserve monetized all of that by buying them and printing money. So easy money became available, bad habits got developed, wrong valuations got created, valuations that were far in excess of the inherent values of companies got created, all wrong habits, governance issues began popping up. So all of these began happening. But at some point of time, things will catch up. All the bad things that you do, there will be consequences. And the big consequence in the US for all their bad habits was that inflation began picking up. And when inflation began picking up in a very big way, there was no choice but to kill the liquidity and withdraw the liquidity from the market. And when you withdraw the liquidity, money is not easily available. And one asset class for most LPs, investors, big institutional funds is the startup category. Now this startup category therefore began suffering. And to me, it's a very good thing because in the phase of the last 5 years, many wrong things had happened. Wrong role models got created. Companies like BharatPe and their founders became iconic, which to me is a wrong way of telling our young people how to build companies. And as a result of which today, everyone is pushing for profitability. Many startups that had successfully raised money in the past on stories about building companies with top line growth are now focusing on bottom line growth. Everybody is putting pressure. To me, I think, this is a very big change. And to me, this is the next phase of entrepreneurship in India, when you will see new role models, when you will see that businesses have to be built keeping the very fundamental principles of business building in mind. And you cannot build businesses just by growing the top line and giving cash discounts, and all of those kinds of things. So I think this funding journey, I see it very positively. I'm very optimistic that the right kind of companies will survive, the right kind of companies will get built and they will get funded. So this briefly, I think, is a very interesting story of India's entrepreneurship journey and how founders and startups have transformed very successfully the landscape, innovative landscape of India. And in the process also, they themselves went through multiple journeys themselves. And I hope that the next phase of the journey would be about building very interesting companies that solve the problems of the underprivileged in India. So I think the next 400 million Indians will see their tryst with destiny. I hope the next 800 million also will see their tryst with destiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hari. I think that was very, very stirring and a very honest assessment and soul searching of what went wrong in the startup sector.
Thank you.
So my question is, you talked about the funding winter,
Yes.
right? And it is going to reset the expectations and also separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yes.
What would be the top 3 things which an aspiring entrepreneur should do at this point of time to sail through this winter? Because everyone is very cagey.
Yes.
Nobody is going to open their checkbooks and write.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what would you suggest they should do to survive this
So I think
situation?
anybody who's already into entrepreneurship, if you're not into entrepreneurship, I would suggest, get into entrepreneurship for the right reasons. Don't get into, if youngsters have asked me in the past, I've said, don't even try entrepreneurship because it's a very difficult journey. Take up a job, get a regular salary, buy a house, buy a car, lead a happy life, go on a vacation. But don't try entrepreneurship. If you want to really try entrepreneurship, do it because of the right reason, that you really want to solve some deep problem and you believe you're the right person to solve it. Now, if you're already an entrepreneur, I think you should just get back to the basics on how to build a business. And the basics about how to build a business is that it should be profitable. And that's the reason why a business exists. If you're not profitable, you will not survive. So run it profitably, get some good habits, be very frugal. Frugality, for example, is a completely undervalued idea. So be very frugal in the way you build a business, develop good habits, good governance. I think they eventually pay off. All these, glamorous stuff like burning money and trying to acquire market share will get you some distance. But some point of time when the tide turns, you will be dead. So always be committed to the right things.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
I invite Dr. Ravindran and Mr. Murali. Can you also please come on the stage to hand over a sapling to Mr. Hari?
So our next speaker is again someone who is very familiar face, and I'm delighted to introduce Mr. H.V. Harish, the past president of BCIC, and a veteran with 30 plus years in experience in finance, banking, and consulting. So Mr. Harish is a honors graduate from IMC, and he single-handedly kind of grew the Grant Thornton practice in India and achieved the kind of scale and prominence which it has today. And apart from working in the corporate sector, he now serves on the board of reputed institutions and committees. Some of the institutions he is associated with are TAPMI, which is TFI Management Institute in Manipal, the iSpirit policy team, which is actually trying to shape a very good product, software product ecosystem in India, and also the manufacturing task force of GOK. A much sought after speaker. We are looking forward to your talk, sir.
Thank you. With apologies to you, sir, I've used a film meme out here with a different perspective. From a sustainability perspective, RRR means reduce, recycle, and reuse. So I think this is the theme that I've been asked to speak about. It covers everything you've heard since morning, and it is something that we all need to be fully aware of, that sustainability is important for us to survive, and probably more important for the generations to come to survive, given the scale of devastation we've crossed over the past several decades on the environment and on society. So both these are important. I currently work with a company called eCube, and we are focused on ESG, and the first two letters are environment and society. In both, we have serious problems. We have environmental destruction, and we've also created a system which is very efficient at rewarding people like us, but keeping out a lot of people. So the inequality is something that is getting worse and worse, and needs to be addressed if we have to continue our path of happy existence, for not just for us, but for our next generation. Yeah. Fortunately, we are all Indians, and we have understood the importance of sustainability, but post-liberalization, we've gone on this diet of heavy consumption, presuming that consuming more, wasting more, and throwing more is the best way to live. So I compare my own home with my mother's home, and I'm not different from the rest of you. We every morning have 2 bags which we have to give to BBMP, the waste from our house, dry waste and wet waste. My mother throws nothing. And she lives independently. Not a single thing goes out of the house. She's happy, contented. She manages her own house because she says, I don't have waste. First, I don't waste food. I don't waste anything that I need to throw out. So, something that we need to learn, and which is why I use that 3R, reduce, reuse, and recycle. So I think we need to think in the future, are we going to be consumption-led, which is fine if we are consuming, but if we are only going to waste, then should we be more sustainability-led? Right. Some hard facts on climate, which is one of the biggest worries for us. What is good is RBI in its latest report has focused on climate. It's probably the first central bank to focus on climate, and it states that the country experienced extreme weather events on 314 out of 365 days in 2022, claimed 3,026 lives and 1.96 million hectares of cropland. These events have reduced our output growth as well as raised inflation. India is one of the first places in the world to experience heat waves that cross the survivability limit for a healthy human being. So this is something that is forecast, and there are far worse things that are coming. Now, unfortunately, we did not cause this, but we are facing the brunt of it. So we have to, whether we like it or not, we can happily blame the West for what they've done over the last 50, 100 years, but we have no choice because, in fact, funnily enough, there are some people who are quite happy with this global warming, and I'm told parts of Russia and Canada are looking forward to more usable land in their countries thanks to global warming. But either we all have to go there, or we will have to find another place to live if we don't address this problem. Now, before I proceed with the rest of the presentation, which is on this focus, I must admit that I've used technology for this presentation. So if you like the presentation, you can compliment me. If you don't, please complain to ChatGPT. I just put the subject and saying into ChatGPT saying, give me a presentation on this subject, and it gave me a good draft. I've slightly edited it, but it's mostly ChatGPT, not me. So I think we face an issue of meeting the demands of growing population, increased need for energy, waste generation. Can we have growth with reduced consumption and waste? Should we go back to our roots is a question. For example, as India gets warmer and warmer, the demand for ACs will keep going up. And this is going to be the biggest market for ACs. Now that means power consumption, that means emission. How do we handle that? I think we've covered this. Waste not, want not is an old proverb. We should probably start thinking of that. I'll just give you some sense of the scale of waste in 3 areas. Municipal waste, which is huge. It's also an opportunity for recycling for a business. So when you look at sustainability, one is what can you do to reduce, reuse, and recycle. The other is what is the business opportunity that comes there. And some of the startups will be working on this, and I'm sure, like Hari talked about, there is going to be innovative solutions that will come to address these problems, and hopefully a lot of money will go into this space. Plastic waste, again, a huge problem for India. We are pretty low on a per capita consumption basis, but it's a very significant issue. Construction waste, it estimated to cause 40% of the world's carbon emission, and India is going to be on a huge construction boom going forward. The waste opportunity, again, I think there are a lot of regulations. So what is driving sustainability? One is regulation, one is judicial activism, the need for the consumers to feel good. So for example, there are people who want to buy only sustainable products, and therefore a demand is created for that. So there is 3 different pressures from the government, from the regulators, and from the public, as well as, most important, the investors. ESG investment is taking big shape, and very soon, if you are in a business which is considered non-sustainable, you will not receive any capital. I know, for example, Citibank has in some parts of the world said that all our consumers need to be net zero by a certain date, and they've identified an agency to certify that, and they're telling their clients by 2035, if you're not certified net zero, we will call back all our loans. So I think it's no longer a situation where we can ignore it. If you need capital, you need to be sustainable. Paris Agreement is something that India was a part of. We've made significant commitments, and it's not just the government, but each one of us to address the problems. We've been a pioneer, in spite of the fact that the Paris Agreement is fairly recent. Our Environment Protection Act was passed in 1986. We launched the Project Tiger in 1973. I think we've been very aggressive on the renewable and EV side. There is a good amount of activity on sustainable agriculture, and as I mentioned, the RBI report was the first one by a global central bank focused on climate change. So, I mean, not just the report in terms of what is the impact. They're going to impose a lot of measures on banks. So you might see something like what we saw with Citibank coming up in India very soon. We know about the EV revolution. Again, I think India has taken some big leaps. We have the FAME scheme. We expect, we've seen buses now. I think there is a bus from Bangalore to Tirupati, which is EV bus. So I think we are going to see a lot of change in the EV side, and probably going to be among the biggest EV markets in the world very soon. The Swachh Bharat Abhiyan was a great initiative, I would say, in terms of building awareness, but I think we as a nation are very wedded to our old habits of wasting and not keeping clean. And we need to work on this very, very hard to change our habits on a variety of things. Sustainable agriculture, again, agriculture is a big source of carbon as well as waste. And we need to think of going back to some of our ancient practices for agriculture, including what kind of crops we need to grow, how do we feed the growing population, how do we conserve water, reduce chemicals, and enhance soil health. Energy was a separate section given to me, so I will cover energy a little more in smaller detail. We are growing and our energy consumption is going to grow up. There's no way India is going to achieve any growth, and particularly for a large section of the population which is suffering, they need more and more energy, so we have to generate more energy to meet their needs, and the only way to do it is to increase the mix of renewables within the mix of energy that we generate. We launched the solar mission in 2010, and this is among the most successful missions that we've launched. In fact, we've become the home of the International Solar Alliance in partnership with France. So I think India has achieved some phenomenal growth in solar energy generation. We're still dependent on modules from China, but hopefully that will also reduce as we go along. 450 megawatts of renewable energy is our target by 2030, most of which coming from solar and the rest from wind energy. I think I've covered this. We've covered wind. So I think we are fortunate to have solar being in a tropical country, and we need to leverage that to the maximum that is possible. Ditto for hydroelectric and bioenergy. I think the other important thing that we all need to focus on is energy efficiency, which gets ignored quite easily. How can we improve the use of energy in everything we do, whether it is LEDs, whether it's more efficient motors, whether it's efficient transportation. EVs are good not just because they don't pollute, but they're also far more efficient than an IC engine in terms of conversion of energy into motion. So I think a lot of focus needs to also go in terms of use of energy, not just producing more and more energy. So we need to face the challenges that are coming up our way in terms of the clean energy requirements, support the government in its initiatives, and in our own way reduce, reuse, and recycle. So let me stop here and let us work towards, I've got 4 minutes left, so maybe if there are any Q&A, we'll do that. But we can work towards a sustainable future for the benefit of the planet and for all generations to come, which is the most critical part. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harish. I have a question, but I'm wondering, should I ask you or should I ask ChatGPT? Anyway,
For now, I will replace ChatGPT.
Yeah. So for companies which have an intent to really build sustainable practices into their business model, and I know there is not much regulation around forcing them to do that, especially in India, right? So what would you advise the first few steps they should take to get started on the journey before it becomes too late and before they are forced to follow the best practices?
Well, I think we tend to follow regulations even though we know there is a problem, but regulation is already there. The top 1,000 companies from this year will have to disclose under what is called the business responsibility reporting, everything they're doing about sustainability. Second is there is pressure from investors. you will not get money from bankers and lenders if you are not following sustainable practices. So there is external pressure. But from an inside, I think the recognition that what are we doing, which steps are there, is our product sustainable, are we recycling our product, are we following circularity? So I think we need to start thinking of what can we do, and that will give you a competitive edge with the consumer, with the investor, and with the regulator. If you can do something unique, for example, we were talking to a tire company, and if you know batteries, if you go to buy a battery, you have to give back the old battery. So I was telling them, why don't you do that for tires? And then you can figure out how you can reuse the carbon in some way. And they said there's no regulation around it. I said, you start it. If you start it, the advantage is you will get the visibility for it. You will learn how to do it. And then you can go to the government and say, pass a regulation for this. So I think these are things one could think about and do ahead of regulation.
Absolutely. I think I can give the example from fashion industry. Clothing is again something which contributes hugely to the landfill. And some of the companies have tied up with this organization called Goonj, which actually has a fantastic reverse supply chain to ensure that there is circularity. So thank you, sir. I invite Mr. Karthikeyan, kindly come on stage along with Dr. Ravindran to hand over a sapling. So both Mr. Hari and Mr. Harish gave back some minutes. Thanks for that, this thing. So make sure that we end on time. We are very particular about that. So our next speaker is Mr. Manu Saleh. He's the Managing Director and CEO of Mercedes-Benz R&D India. As many of you are aware, Mercedes-Benz has a very big center, and India is one of the countries where a lot of R&D work happens. And he leads the largest R&D setup for Mercedes-Benz outside their home country. So outside Germany. So that's a phenomenal achievement. So India is the largest outside Germany in terms of the R&D setup. So Manu is an electronics engineer from Malnad College of Engineering in Hassan, and he has more than 27 years of experience in the innovation space, especially in the automotive sector. And he has served in several leadership positions in the engineering sector across different companies, and he is under his leadership, Mercedes-Benz R&D has won several accolades, and key of them being the Product Excellence, Engineering and Innovation Excellence Awards by NASSCOM. So they were recognized as the E-R&D Organization of the Year. So over to you, sir. Looking forward to hearing from you on how Mercedes, a luxury brand, actually looks at leadership, global awareness and ability to foster an innovation culture in that segment, especially a premium segment where you charge an arm and a leg for your car. Thank you.
I've borrowed the hand mic because I'm not used to standing behind a podium in corporate town halls. Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to spend the next about 15, 17 minutes. Strongly connected, at least to the last 2-3 topics that you heard. You'd be surprised to know how much the auto sector is connected to sustainability as a topic, to the discussions on startups that you had, to entertainment actually, to healthcare if there's somebody in the room. It's an emerging sector. We are Mercedes' largest R&D entity outside of Germany. It all happened in the last 10 years. A couple of years ago, we had this board member of ours who had come to India, and I prepared him to meet the media. So basically gave him a list of things that we do out of India as innovation for the product, for the company. He was all prepared and rattling out to some of the media people what he saw during the last 2 days in Bangalore and Pune, and was saying things. At some point, I recognized he just put that paper away. He just wanted to summarize it, and he did it so well. He said there's a little bit of India in every Mercedes, meanwhile, right? For a brand like that, for an iconic brand like that, it was a proud moment for us to hear somebody say there's a bit of Indian R&D or Indian brain that's working in every Mercedes. We are a team, more than 10,000 people, situated here in Whitefield, partly in Pune, looking to foray into other cities in the country as well. And our singular passion, if I may say, is to ensure that somebody soon says that there's a huge part of India in every Mercedes, right? I think the engineering capacity and capability in this country absolutely deserves that to happen. While we're talking about it, the auto sector is undergoing a very big transformation. We would have done what we did for the last 25 years. We started in Bangalore in 1996, but it doesn't suffice, it doesn't work. And I'm here to spend the next about 15 minutes talking about innovation, particularly as a keyword, to sustain our business. Before I go into the 4 or 5 slides that I have, all very colorful ones, as you'd expect from Mercedes-Benz. At the end is a form. If you sign up, you can buy a car outside. If you can play the video for me as I'm just waiting. Thank you. The Vision EQXX was the first battery car that did more than 1,000 kilometers on a single charge, right? So you wouldn't have range anxiety going from here to Pune, Mumbai, without having to wait at a charging station. This doesn't happen by just packing a larger battery into it. The weight simply increases. It happens because of engineering excellence. It happens because you're able to get, as Sir was just saying, the maximum juice out of the car, efficiency out of an electric vehicle. And a large portion of that contribution has also come from India and the Indian engineering team. We've had a history of innovation, right? For those of you who didn't know, the company that invented the car was Mercedes-Benz. In 1886, and if you're familiar with this picture here, the first patent, as you can see, and you've seen a lady, Bertha Benz, who's taken it out on a drive and saw it on WhatsApp circulating some weeks ago, or heard about stories, and all the women should be proud here in the room. Her taking it out even without telling her husband. He invented it, hid it in his garage, was very shy to show it off to the world, not even confident. His wife decided to take it out on a spin, 90 kilometers between Stuttgart and a place called Pforzheim in the south of Germany, and it drove. She took her 2 children and went to her parents, her mother's house in the car, and for the first time, somebody went out on a mechanized transport, ditching the horse, right? Until then, you could only go as far as your horse could take you. You could meet friends, you could change horses, but you could meet friends, you could do business, you could transport anything for as long as your horse could take you. From 1886, when that car was invented, you could go further. Today, 1,000 kilometers on a single charge or with a diesel tank, whatever, but the company since then has been inventing and inventing and inventing, right? Thousands of patents, many new firsts to its name, airbags for the first time in a car, safety for the first time in a car, chassis designs, aerodynamics like you've never imagined. You drive a Mercedes-Benz and the brand not just for the money that you pay for it, because it's engineering excellence, right? That's, our tagline says, the best or nothing. And all the engineers that work for the company have to strive engineering-wise that the product literally is the best or nothing. But on the other hand, all the 137 years of engineering has been, in some ways, as we'd like to admit, incremental. As we just heard from Hari sir as well, today's world of mobility is turning on its head. And I tell you why I reference to Hari's presentation, because we are at the mercy of the capital markets. We are not funny money company with a startup mentality, yes, but not startup funding. And when our CEO goes to the capital markets, they're looking at what do you do? And with a triple-digit billion invested in plants around the world, an auto industry still gives you about 5 to 6% return on sales, which for most industrialists in the room is not attractive, right? You could do 25% delivering pizzas and medicines to home and much more. And here is a big auto company that's just about working, barely managing its double-digit contribution margin from the business. That is where the auto industry is right now. Just like I have a very unfair time slot just before lunch to catch your attention, the industry has a very unfair position right now that it has to be at the mercy of capital markets for funding, and we need money by millions and billions right now. The reason is simple. The reason is because the auto industry, like I said, mobility is transforming itself on its head. I don't know how much you think about it, but replacing an IC engine with an electric drive is an engineering challenge, but more than that, a societal challenge, a cultural challenge, an acceptance challenge for all of you to let go of range anxiety and suddenly move to something else. The source of energy, the fuel for your car, is literally in your home right now on the plug point at 6 rupees or 7 rupees a unit. And I don't know how many of you would be interested eventually to pay 30 rupees a unit and get it supercharged somewhere outside for 5 times, right? We've shifted the BPs and the Indian oil corporations to your plug point and saying, don't forget to charge your car at home at night when you sleep, just like you do your mobile phone. And be aware of the range that you drive, because today if you go Bangalore, Chennai, you won't find a good charging station, or you just wait for too long to charge your car, which is unacceptable, right? You can't sit 2 hours waiting to charge your car. So it's a huge challenge to go electric, number one. Second, I'm sure you've all heard a lot about autonomous driving, right? Taking the driver out of the picture, forget about the job securities and other things that the ministers are talking about, saves you 1 billion or more hours a year out of driving. That is time given back to your hands, and somebody I think from the university was talking here as well. Time is the single important factor that mankind literally misses. It's just going behind you. You're all sitting for the next 15 minutes listening to me. That's valuable time. Giving you 1 billion hours back as you avoid driving and do something, doesn't matter, working on your office work, connecting, entertaining yourself, is the biggest gain for the industry. And you can imagine that is from the Disneys to the Netflixes very interested to get that time back. So they want to entertain you during that time. They want to sell something to you during that time. They want to keep you engaged during that time. Maybe you can buy something on Amazon during that time. So the screen inside the car is, according to us industry, the last unconquered screen. Your mobile phone is already conquered by somebody else. Your television is conquered by somebody else. But the auto OEMs and their big real estate inside, which you call as display, is the last unconquered, economically unconquered screen. There's a huge amount of potential in that. It's not just to tune your radio station and listen to and navigate yourself point A to point B, but literally to engage you, probably even economically, during the drive. And if you don't have a driver, we get an entire real estate at the backseat of your car as well to do it. So that's the second big thing, autonomous driving. The third big thing that's moving us is the connected piece of this whole thing. You park your car in the garage and step out, we've lost you as a customer, right? As long as you're inside the car, we know what you're doing, going point A to point B, whereas the mobile phone company knows way more because you probably, except for showering, having that in your pocket all the time, it knows exactly what you're doing, what you're browsing. We'd like to know a lot about our customers, but unfortunately, you leave the car in the garage. So to have it hyper-connected to the ecosystem, it seems simple, but it's not. And to be able to understand what you do with the car, to probably move some transactions from your mobile phone to your car, is the second biggest thing that auto OEMs are thinking about and doing. These 3 spaces, and a few more, is moving the auto industry significantly. Innovations are coming out of that, and this one picture shows you how a connected car could tell you what's going on at home, whether you left the geyser on, the television on, whether you just want to turn on the heater if you're a Western home before you reach, whether you want to warm your car up before you get into the car, and a host of other things that you could do. These are not fancies anymore, but already working. Artificial intelligence brings another new layer of technology within the car, right? Innumerable number of use cases, not just for fancy, not just to make you feel wow, but also for safety, which is a big brand promise that Mercedes has. By 2050, there's a discussion if technology can support us so much that if you're inside a Mercedes, you'll not die. God forbid if there's an accident somewhere, the plans are that the engineering should be at such a level that if you're inside the car, there's no fatalities, right? A tree can fall, a truck can ram into you, but if you're inside a Mercedes, nothing happens to you. And for all of that, we need the next level safety functions for us to understand exactly what you're doing in the car. If your attention is really on the road or off it, I need to track your eyeballs to understand what you're looking at. If your phone is ringing and you're just looking away, if you have a gaze that's away from the road, even if it's on the road but looking at a bird that's passing by and not exactly at the traffic, the car is able to make out from the cameras inside and the AI functions inside and appropriately give you instructions to say, hey, we need to slow down because you're not looking where you're looking. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Today already the EQS breaks itself depending on what's happening outside. It slows itself down. It gives you warnings depending on what you do, all in a bid to save lives. And you see several other things that are possible. To this round, standing here in Bangalore, I'm really happy as early as 2019 already at the Consumer Electronics Show. My colleagues from Bangalore demoed the first ever AI within the car. We put Bangalore or India on the roadmap, the world map on what technology can do to a vehicle and to a brand like Mercedes. We've had, as he kindly introduced me, several forays into innovation. We believe, and I started with that, I said incremental innovations have been happening over the last 137 years. It's time for something disruptive in the auto industry. And just imagine if you're in the society, if you're a fan of the brand, if you're a fan of the mobility sector, you'd be saying, Mercedes-Benz, you invented the car in 1886. When it's about to reinvent itself, we don't want another name doing that, right? We don't want another name doing that. We'd like to be reinventing it ourselves. And I think that's the biggest engineering challenge that we have in the company. Every big company with data, Google's, Apple's, want to make a car meanwhile. Tesla is out there with its discussions. There are Chinese competitors. And the single big ambition we have at Mercedes-Benz is to be able to leave another 150 years of legacy behind to say they invented the car, and when it really went through a disruptive phase, they were able to reinvent it for the society to use it in new ways. And I have the honor and the opportunity with all of this to ensure that when the car is reinvented, India gets its place in the sun because of the 13,000 engineers that are contributing to this from here and saying a big part of that invention came out of India. That's our story from Whitefield. We are trying to balance the legacy that we are, the past as we call, the present, all the incremental stuff that we have done in the last years out of globe, out of India as well, and bring in the future as well of the company together. How we want to do it, we are also a sector that everybody looks at and says, responsible for emissions, especially on your tailpipe. Tailpipe is a problem because it's parked right below your nose in every street, in every garage. Moving electric 100% and shifting the problem to a better place to manage it in a central power station or something is a smarter way of doing it. So we are a company that's committed to 100% electric. We are not doing any IC engines anymore. We see huge potential in India with academia. I had my colleague from Chanakya here, right? A lot of work going on with universities like that. We're working on sustainability. The richer the person, the more aware he or she is about sustainability. Today, I'm sure you agree. I can't pack in leather in the car anymore and say luxury. I need to find alternatives. It's not just the electric drive. Every material in the car needs to go through a cradle to grave analysis for us to understand how recyclable is this. But at the same time, I cannot let go of the brand ethos. It is a luxury product at the end of the day. If I stuff in Kerala coir inside, you won't get the feeling of a Mercedes inside, right? So we have the big challenge to go green, at the same time stay a little bit on the engineering side excellence and fully sustainable as well. So these are the challenges that we are working on. That's the next 25 years of India that I'm looking at. We are 25 years old in the city right now. That's the next 150 years we're looking at as a brand, and Thank you so much for inviting me and listening to the Mercedes story. If you have any questions, otherwise, I won't delay your lunch.
No, so you didn't disappoint us. I think that was a very fascinating talk. So I have a question. I think it was really amazing to learn that the car companies are transforming themselves from just focus on engineering and the hardware to more of a technology and devices. My question is this: I don't follow the car sectors, especially the companies, but I see that the market is valuing companies like Tesla humongously high, maybe for the technology and for the fact that they are. Is that also happening with the traditional car companies? Are you also seeing the benefit of this bump in valuation? And I know the market, the margins are very, very wafer thin, and it's always a struggle for car companies. Are you seeing that innovation leading to improvements in the valuations?
I am back with what our esteemed speaker said there. Content is really the king. Luckily for us, we have grown on content, so the markets are also looking for content, not just on promises. When we go 1,000 kilometers on a real drive, that bumps the valuation, not some tech discussions around something fanciful. That's an opportunity for us because we are bred in that space and like to stay in that space. It's also a challenge for us because it's a slower path to take, but we believe it's a more sustainable path to take. There is a huge discussion going on, especially after the new tech announcements around the US car companies, but also the Chinese. We were at the Shanghai Motor Show last week, 2 weeks ago. It's unbelievable what kind of tech they're talking about and what kind of tech they've put in the car already, right? You could drive autonomous in China today already in a cab. Just order the cab on the phone. There's nobody sitting on the driver's seat or the co-pilot seat. You're sitting at the back and it's just driving, weaving through Peking's traffic, overtaking left and right, a little bit like conditions outside here, completely successfully. If you didn't know that, you'd really need to watch those videos to say where has tech reached. So we have a challenge on hands, but it's a slower path right now.
Great. I mean, looking forward to the day when we can drive a Merc driverless and navigate with all the autos and all the bikes in Bangalore. Okay, yeah. And let me invite Dr. Devarajan and Dr. Ravindran onto the stage, and Mr. Ahmad Ali, the past president of BCIC. We would like you all to hand over a memento to Mr. Manu Saleh. Thanks, Manu. That was really fascinating. A lot of things I learned. Okay, so we won't hold you back from lunch. We have the last part of the session. And thanks everyone for cooperating, ensuring that we are close on time. So I now invite Dr. Devaraj to Dr. Ravindran to deliver the vote of thanks.
I have a good news and a bad news. What do you want first?
What is the good news? We all get a mark, is it?
The good news is that I will not hold you back for too long. The bad news is that I will speak only for 27 minutes, is it? No, I will not hold you back. I am not a good speaker at all. But let me begin by thanking each of the speakers present here. I would like to name each of them. Padma Shri Nivedita Bhide, Mr. Sudhanshu Mani, Mr. Chandru Kalro, Mr. Kamal Bali, Mr. Shekhar Vishwanathan, Mr. Kandaswamy Bharatan, Dr. Chetan Singhai, Mr. T.N. Hari, Mr. H.V. Harish, Mr. Manu Saleh. The speakers emanated from Kanyakumari to Lucknow. We couldn't go up to Kashmir because G20 is happening there, so we couldn't get anybody from there. So, but I think it's a job well done. BCIC is at the staring at the cusp of seeking further glory in the future years. And as a leader, my job is to ensure that this team succeeds once again. Inconvenience of any kind that you had in this hall otherwise, I sincerely regret and apologize. It's not our making. I think choice of getting a good hotel and a room, a conference room, has become very, very tough in Bangalore at the moment. So I'm a little passionate, at the same time very impatient. So today is May 31st. We fixed this deadline, and we decided that on May 4th that we'll have this conference. So in 27 days, getting this 9 speakers, plan A was 9, plan B had another 6, and plan C was, what if 9 and 6 don't make it, then another 9. Luckily, out of the first 11 that we chose, 9 of them agreed, and they are here. So it's indeed sincere thanks to each one of you to have made this. As Mr. Sudhanshu Mani said, he's named many grandfathers. My grandfathers could not possibly speak English, but there is one John Quincy Adams who I would adopt as my grandfather. He said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. Wow, 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 wow. Yeah. Leadership is another interesting thing that came across very recently. Today we are on Wednesday. Monday, the final match, Monday morning, the final match of IPL happened, and everything was going well for Gujarat Titans. 13 runs required, 6 balls, first 4 balls go for only 3 runs, everything is done. And there's a wonderful internet joke that is doing the rounds. Captain went up, he's a leader, gave some good gyan. The next ball flew for a 6. He didn't stop there. He thought still there are 4 more runs to be scored. I should not leave him. We have done so well in the tournament. We have been the chart beating team. So he again goes and gives him another gyan. This time it goes for another 4. So micromanagement cannot be the way organization or leadership can function. So what did I do as a leader here? I stayed away. Even before the IPL matches, I only told my team, and always I've been doing that, what not to do. And the rest of it they will do. So it has succeeded. And if it has succeeded, I would like to call upon the following people: Ms. Niranjan Mandyam, Ms. Rupa, Ms. Rashri, Mr. Leo, Mr. Purushot, Ms. Vijaya is not here, Mr. Shyam Prasad is not here, Mr. Nagaraj is here, I think, somewhere. He's here. Dr. Devarajan, of course, Mr. Vineet is outside. Please give them a big round of applause. One sapling. And take it, you don't go out of the stage. So there is one sapling to be presented by Dr. Devarajan to the team members. They are the actual custodians of all. They are the actual custodians of the money plants. They have about 240 in the secretariat. So only one is being presented. Anytime they can take away one. This is only a memento. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You can stay here. You can stay here. Some more photographs, please. Yeah. Photographer, le lo. So all of us are well aware that the new strategy for organizations is growth and competitiveness, which has been well covered today. And these have been born out of our recognizing certain undercurrents that got accentuated during the pandemic. What are they? Climate emergency, emerging geopolitical dynamic, digitalization, sustainability, etc. And we also, all our members realize that we must be more agile and more customer centric. Then we also identified ourselves that the growth levers for competitiveness should be established. And for growth, we identified sustainability and digitalization as the mega trends of the decade. And we also know now that net zero carbon and net zero water has become inevitable in hotels. So using my limited brain, in these 27 days, on the first day itself, we decided that these are the themes that we should concentrate upon, and that has been well delivered by our speakers. Thank you very much. Leading BCIC is not a simple job for the following reasons. BCIC is like a mega conglomerate, and we have our own job to fulfill, and also the dal roti comes out of elsewhere. This is a non-paying job, right? Under these circumstances, let me give you some facts. There are 950 members, and each of the member company or an organization or institution is represented by 5 leaders. So I have to deal with 950 companies multiplied by 5, 4,500 individuals of top class quality. So I don't need to have any quality. Quality will rub on me. 28 expert committees, each of them having 4 leaders, chairman, co-chairman, women leader, etc. So 112 of them, and 44 past presidents like Ms. Ahmad Ali. I will be the 45th. 21 management committee members. This totals up to 4,677 leaders we have here. So if you do not deliver high quality leadership summits like this and do 200 events an year, I'll be kicked out. And before I get kicked out in the next 2 months, I thought this leadership conclave should happen. It has happened. And this happens to be a flagship event for BCIC and flagship event for me. And with this, I sign off my tenure and look forward to the annual general meeting happening on July 31st, 28, 2023. You're all requested to be joining us for that. So with these words, I now request you to kindly join me for lunch. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
The lunch for the delegates is arranged in the aqua area. This is just outside. It's just next to the pool, so people could go there and then have their lunch.